Hello.
Hello.
Hey, hi, Christine. Hey, Cecilia. Hey, Hassan. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Do people hear me? Okay,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Oh, so what's this, Hassan, that you posted in here? You got a, oh, okay, great. Yes. Thank you. Let's see who else. Melinda. Hi, Melinda.
Hi. How's everyone?
Good.
Okay, I have no voice, so I'm leaving it all up to you.
No.
Is that Cecilia?
Yes,
Hi.
so I'm gonna mute myself.
I'm sorry that that is happening to you. So we are going to wait a couple more minutes and see who hops on the call. Oh, hey, Eric, how you doing?
Well, how about yourselves? I've got these two weird globes behind me. I didn't realize.
Hey, Eric.
Hey,
Actually, I guess you must have a lot of wisdom for this call because you've got a halo over your head.
Is that what it is?
oh, I hesitate to ask.
All right. So let's see. I think I said hello to Antonia. Hey, Antonia, if I didn't. We're just gonna wait
How are you?
one more minute and then we'll jump into things. Cecilia has a sore throat today, so she will not be saying anything today. How's the weather where everybody is? It's a beautiful day. It had been getting cold. I'm in Kansas City. It had been getting cold, but today is awesome. Why can't it just be like this all the time? Anybody have extreme weather where they are?
So I'm in Detroit and we had the start of some snow flurries earlier today.
Oh, is that a good or a bad thing for you?
For me, it's a bad thing. I don't like the winter.
I know some of the West Coast people are probably having a great time, having good days.
Who's West Coast? Well, Melinda sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. Here I am. I'm here. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mixed blessing here that technically the sun is out, but the air quality because of all the fires are not so great. So a lot of staying indoors and yeah, unfortunate.
Sorry to hear that. So what do you think? Eric, Hassan, should we start?
Yes.
Let's see. So we normally start this off with a quick intro and popcorn. And today, although Cecilia is not talking, her presence is felt. She sent a question in. Share a time when you felt like an outsider. Ooh. Let's see. Who wants to start? I lost my
I can go.
Okay, go ahead.
I would say the thing that pops into my head is when I first moved to the US. I was 5 years old. It took me a while to feel like I was at home and connect with people because of I didn't speak the language. It was a foreign country. It was a totally new system, and I really felt like an outsider. And I will go over to Melinda.
Okay. All right, let's see. I mean, I guess there's a few things that come to mind. One is when I was an executive at an engineering firm. I talk about this in my TED Talk, actually. So if you all, I know a couple of you have seen it. So I was an executive and I was the only woman of a leadership team of 19. And definitely felt like an outsider from day one, and was treated like an outsider from day one. And it was definitely a challenge to overcome, in addition to all the other like daily challenges of being an executive. Yeah. How about over to Christine?
Hi, I'm Christine. I'm currently at a business school in Pennsylvania. So I think when I first felt like a huge outsider and a kind of like a phony was when I started my PhD here, because my background was in psychology, and I spent most of my time in an elementary school as a counselor. So coming into a business school and trying to hang with people who spoke business language was tough. Still trying to fit in, I guess. But I'll pop over to Eric.
Let's see. Yeah, just last week, some friends and colleagues have they've got a startup for sort of Black creators of VR and AR content, and they assembled this sort of 2-day salon workshop summit here in Albuquerque, where most of the creators themselves were Black and brown from those different communities, primarily in LA and New York. So just one of the folks who was not necessarily a media creator, but just a very different environment, which was good and healthy. So just good to be there and just see, figure out how I need to be present in that space. Let's see, how about Leva?
Yes, I just joined. I had some technical issues. So what is the question?
Sorry, I just muted myself. So the question we're asking, we put a couple of these up in the chat, but if you weren't on, you won't see it. So the popcorn question for today is share a time when you felt like an outsider. And just so folks know, we do the popcorn to kind of keep things lively and moving through. And it's an opportunity for us to interact with each other and start building those kinds of connections. So when you're done, you'll choose, I'm not sure who else still needs to go, but you'll try and choose somebody else typically.
Okay, thank you. When have I felt like an outsider? Well, several times. I have a background as a dancer, educated musical dancer, and going back to in Holland, and then moved back to Denmark and started brand design and worked within metallographic, which is material testing with the diamond suspension. Well, you can imagine moving from aero acrobatics and dance into the engineering world and diamond suspension. That was when I felt like an outsider, but also moving from that into the business community, starting to teach entrepreneurship in business schools. And that was also a transition in itself. But always finding a way to use what I have, this different background. It's not a classical business background, yet how to use that in a relevant way to contribute with, to create value. That is basically how I try to do that. But I mean, I have tons of stories of feeling like an outsider, creating my own way. And now I don't know who's been and not been, but let's popcorn over to you, Hassan. Have you been on a call yet?
I have. I think I think Malika has not gone yet. And
Sure, I'll take it. I'll take it. So mine was weird. There's lots of times that I felt like an outsider, but one place where I didn't think that I would feel like an outsider is I had an expat position in Nigeria. And so in Nigeria, I look very much like a Nigerian before I speak and how I carry myself, but I was an expat and an American. So, and my work was mainly with expats who were mainly not Nigerian. And so I often felt as though, even though I look Nigerian, I wasn't Nigerian, so I didn't really fit into that community, right? And then the expats community, unfortunately, saw me as looking Nigerian and not American, I guess, because that's, or not an expat, because it just could not connect the idea that a Black person is here in Nigeria as an expat. And so just kind of the spaces where you're holding between these two worlds, where you think you should be fitting in, based kind of in both of those areas, as a Black person in Nigeria, and then as an American with other expats, but not finding that space. So I'm gonna popcorn to Antonia.
All right. This is a really interesting question. Thank you so much to everyone for sharing your stories and, you know, a little bit of vulnerability in times that you felt like an outsider. I have been thinking of something I want to share, and I guess a time when I feel like an outsider is actually I as a Muslim, I fast during the holy month of Ramadan, and that can make you feel like an outsider at any kind of like social or like networking event, or if you're going to meet somebody for a meeting and they're like, oh yeah, let's have coffee, and you're like, sure, and then you go and you obviously don't partake. So then sometimes you're like, what do I do with my hands, you know, when you don't have something to focus on. But I think for almost every time that I have had that feeling, I've also had an opportunity to, you know, share about why I do that, and then also met some really great allies who have come out of those situations. So I have felt like an outsider, yes, but I think there's also been a lot of positive that has come out of it as well. And then I think that somebody just joined, their name's not listed, but it's an 814 area code.
Hey, it's Beth Zimmer in Erie. How are you?
Hi, we're just going around doing a popcorn kind of like icebreaker question, and wondering a time when you have felt like an outsider. So I'm gonna popcorn to you.
Okay, thank you. And then when I'm done, can you popcorn to someone else? Because I can't see who's on. I'm just on the phone. So Innovation Collaborative in Erie, we're an entrepreneurial ecosystem building organization. And I will say, you know, quite often I feel like an outsider actually in our economic development realm in our meetings. I'm consistently someone that is kind of pushing the envelope, asking the questions, and I can feel the uncomfortableness of the traditional economic development focus versus the necessary focus on entrepreneurship. So with that, could you please popcorn to the next?
I think that is everyone. Unless I'm really, really missing it. I think we got everyone. Oh, wait a second. So let me actually, I will share Cecilia's since she needs someone to help with vocalizing. So she says, I'm with Hassan. I've been an immigrant 2 times. Once in Japan, she's Taiwanese, and then in the US. She grew up in an Italian, Irish, and Jewish neighborhood in New York City. Ah, yes, it's where my father grew up. So that's the input from Cecilia. Thank you very much, Cecilia. If you do have a comment and you just, you know, for whatever reason you don't want to add your voice at the moment or can't, please go ahead and try and put that in the chat, and we will try and feed that into the conversation if you can. Thanks so much. At this point, I'm looking for other updates that may have come around Slack that we may or may not have seen. Do we have any updates that we want to share now, or do we want to try and do that a little bit later? Hearing none.
Yeah, it says in the chat, so I think Cecilia said later, perhaps.
Though it looks like Malika had to leave. Nope, you're still here.
All right. Well, in that case, we move forward. Let's see, are there any other sort of general, well, one question we've got, are there any other updates from the wider community, things that they've seen? And I've got one announcement, but I want to try and find a link for it. Anybody else that have updates from the world since the last call, et cetera? All right, I'm not hearing of any updates. Fantastic. Let's see. So I will drop finding that other thing.
Eric, what kind of updates are you looking for? Maybe that would help.
Basically just looking for sort of general updates from the community. So for instance, if there are special events, activities that are coming up, deadlines, new progress, or special things that have happened in your own community.
Sure. We just launched the ICON project, which is focused on Black and brown men in tech. We have an event coming up in New York on December 3rd, the ICON Summit, bringing Black and brown men together to focusing on emotional intelligence, mental health, and wealth generation.
Yeah, I saw that announcement. That sounds fantastic. That is so exciting. I mean, you really seem to be, I don't know, it seems like progress from, a few steps removed. How is it feeling for you? How is it feeling for you and the team?
It's great. It's great. We've had a really great excitement around it. Really good momentum for it. And a lot of excitement is coming not just from Black and brown men, but Black and brown women who are have told us that it's time. It's past time for something like this to happen, and that feels good too. That the whole community is really interested and excited about it. Yes, we'll share. Maybe Antonia, would you mind sharing the Facebook page and Slack?
Yeah, happy to.
And the event, I guess the ICON Project Summit website too.
Yeah.
So Eric, I can I'll share something that's happening in Detroit. CDFI here called Capital Impact Partners is launching a training for minority developers. So there's a lot of development that's happened in Detroit over the last 5 or 6 years, and most of that has not gone to minority developers. So the CDFI Capital Impact Partners is launching a training for minority developers, and that includes a training and one-on-one support to assist minority real estate developers in Detroit in the process of acquisition of development projects, bidding on projects, and because a lot of those projects have not gone to, I mean, we're pretty much an 80% African American city, and most of the development projects that are happening in Detroit do not represent that. And I'll share a link to that if anyone's interested in looking at that.
And it sort of seems like, in some ways, it seems like a minor thing, where it's not as huge or as big a step as we'd like to take. But here in Albuquerque, the city just launched, I want to say about 2.5 weeks ago, a small business advocacy office, or a small business office. But it's really is part of an effort from the city's economic development and wider team to prioritize not only small business, but to have a more of an equity and a different lens as far as how we look at as far as we look at our entrepreneurial ecosystem, and how do we put the folks who have not been getting the benefit of, I don't know, city investment, et cetera, how do we put them kind of at the forefront of our thoughts and the things that the programs, et cetera, that we put in the field versus kind of at the tail end. So it's a real important step forward for us here. I'll throw the link in there just in case, but it's, all of these different steps I think are helpful in terms of moving things forward. So hopefully we can also all learn from each other. Sharing from Cecilia, let's see, she mentions that she was excited to have Felicia Hatcher from Black Tech Week and Shelley Bell from Black Girl Ventures coming. They're joining you in Tulsa to kick off Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is just in a week and a half. I know, let's see, Malika, you might be involved in something that's happening during Global Entrepreneurship Week in KC.
Oh yeah, we are having a program around diverse ecosystem builders. Thank you for reminding me, because I need to keep promoting that. Yes, in the next couple of weeks. It's a conversation about not only why it's important to reach out and support women and minority entrepreneurs, but also the builders, the people that are making the decisions, that are creating and nurturing the networks, that are making the connections. Those people also need to represent the communities that we are trying to support. So conversations around that.
Hey, Eric, this is Beth. I just wanted to mention that I ran across our neighbors over in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio. They have an organization called Third Space Action Lab. And they've been working for years around diversity and inclusion and equity with Racial Equity Institute and others. So I haven't been able to dig in too deeply, but I think they might be a great guest speaker at some point.
And I'm sorry, I missed part of that in the notes. So where Third Space Action Lab, where is that located again?
They're in Cleveland, Ohio.
So I like that we share these type of things, because often we aren't aware necessarily of what other cities are doing. And sometimes we can take that information and leverage it. And instead of recreating the wheel, is that the way you say that? Instead of redoing things, we can, you know, build upon things that people are already doing, things that are working well. And if there are no other updates, we don't have a speaker. So Cecilia mentioned on the chat that we don't have a speaker this week. We'd like to, in the future, have speakers that come in and talk more in depth about some of their programs or best practices so that we can take those back to our communities. But the question that we wanted to talk about is, there's so much talk, we talk about inclusivity, but what does it mean to you in best practices? And I don't know, we have some sub questions, but I think I'll just leave it with that. What does inclusivity mean to you in terms of best practices? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, yes. I'm organizing Women's Entrepreneurship Day in Denmark. It's on the 19th of November, and we are gathering ecosystem stakeholders from different parts of a very small, compared to the United States, ecosystem. And so investors, accelerator programs, networks, to find ways for more women to start and scale their own businesses. In Denmark, it's 25% of the entrepreneurs are women. And the access to funding is really low, even lower than in the United States. So we are, because Denmark is such a small country, we are organizing ourselves with people from Holland and from Sweden to learn what they've done in programs in Sweden, where they've changed, worked with inclusiveness and diversity as such, and changed the gender balance in the accelerator programs, and that way gotten access to new type of business models and new type of people, ways of thinking business, and how they in Holland have changed the balance in terms of access to funding by working with diversity statements in the VC environment. But learning from these different, in Europe as such, working together on that. But in Denmark on the 19th of November, we are gathering people to look and find new ways to work with inclusiveness and to work with diversity in terms of the gender perspective of diversity.
So, Leva, your area is really focused on kind of the gender diversity. That's kind of your focus area. I wonder, and not specific to you, Leva, but just in general, is that enough to have, is it enough to focus on the identifying markers, or should we also be pulling in experiences, how people's various experiences, even though their identifying markers may look the same, but their experiences are different?
I definitely think that there is a different markers that should be involved, and there are also, talking about diversity, age, experience, culture, so many other markers you could look into, and as you mentioned, experience. The reason why I have this very narrow conversation that is based on gender is because that is where the statistic, the data from research is there. And then that creates a foundation for a relevant conversation. because where I found that if there's lack of data, then it becomes a conversation on opinions. Do you believe or don't you think, is it this or that, or it becomes generalizations that is really hard to argue pro and con. And in Denmark, it's right now, we can be seen as a very equal country, but when it comes to gender, we're really not. We are rather low. So even fighting the very binary question on gender is a big battle, which definitely there are other conversations that we also need to have. But using the gender conversation to get access to talent, experience, different cultures, that is one approach, to use the gender conversation to get access to many of the other indicators that we could be talking about.
Reliance on data is a really good point, and I would love to hear more about best practices around how do we get at the real data around diversity in our entrepreneurial ecosystems. I think Forward Cities has some practices around that, Eric, maybe, but anything else that anyone knows of that could share, that would be awesome.
What in particular are you looking for in terms of data just overall across the ecosystem, the diversity, the demographics?
How does the number of minority and women startups compare to white male startups, and just the general demographic data that we would consistently be looking for so that we can be measuring growth or regression over time?
And remind me what you're working on in particular, and I think that would be helpful. So just to give you a broad understanding of what we do at Change Catalyst is we do a lot of work in the tech ecosystems and startup ecosystems. We're working with VC now to kind of look at the Australian startup ecosystem in terms of diversity, and then how in particular can work to change their systems and processes so that they create a more diverse portfolio, etc. So just curious from what perspective you're looking at it.
Right, so I'm looking at it from the broader ecosystem perspective, where it's not just VC oriented or tech oriented, it's all startups and all people venturing out into the career pathway of entrepreneurship. And how do we establish a baseline in our community so that we can know over time if we're having positive impact with our ecosystem building efforts.
Awesome. Yeah, even the SBA and I think the census has some information, but the SBA has some data on startups, and I'm not sure how localized it is, but that might be a place to start too.
I wonder if, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Just then my last thought is, as a community of ecosystem builders, I think there's a need to really advocate for measuring across the ecosystems, because there isn't a lot of it. So that's a huge problem when you're trying to solve, trying to create change and you don't have the data. So there's a need for some maybe government organizations and economic development organizations to push for measurement so that we can learn more. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, because we tend to look at companies from the start in terms of founders, entrepreneurs of color, and we compare that to other startups and businesses. I'm wondering if anyone is aware of any study or research on companies that have, perhaps maybe even legacy companies that have taken on an initiative to be more inclusive and diversify their leadership, and looked at what the impact has had, what that impact has been on the company, from like a starting point to once they took on this initiative, to see what, in terms of like the economic standing of the company, in terms of the culture in the workplace. I just wonder if anyone is aware of any research that has been done.
I haven't seen any research that does exactly that, but there's definitely a good amount of data on comparing diverse and non-diverse teams and their productivity, innovation, etc. There's some good McKinsey studies on that.
Right now, I'm doing actually a study. Cecilia mentioned we don't have a lot on disabilities, and I completely agree. So I focus a lot on inclusion in the disability space and how social entrepreneurs can step up and either employ or provide leadership opportunities for people with disabilities. And what's been interesting, it's a qualitative research paper. And so I've been interviewing entrepreneurs, and as they continue with their venture over time, their understanding of working with someone with a disability changes. So I don't know, Hassan, if this goes to your point, where as they become more successful, they're actually reaching out towards people with disability and learning from them instead of reaching down and kind of in a paternalistic manner, telling them what to do and what's best for them. So the most successful organizations have actually brought them up to leadership roles where they do have a voice. And it kind of lends to, I think, Malika, you had made a point where the ecosystem builders need to look like the populations they're serving. And we're seeing this in the most successful social enterprises that serve people with disabilities. So.
So I'll have a moment of honesty here. You know, sometimes when we talk about, so one of the questions that we, I posed was, what about the parts about experiences? So if we talk about, if we have a room of all white males, right? And they all come from different, some come from rural experience versus city. Some may have different levels of college education. Some may, some may have different sexualities and identities and different things, but they are all white males. And how does that count in terms of inclusiveness and diversity? And I do often have a challenge when we move into those conversations. For some reason, I feel like that is a second level when we talk about diversity of thought. I'd like to get to the place where I feel comfortable, where I see the outward indicators. And I understand as a person in one of these, I guess, typically marginalized communities that I can't represent for everyone I can't represent everyone that looks like me. There are people who think very differently than me. However, I want to see that first. And then we can start talking about diversifying for thought and all of those type of things. And I want to know how you guys deal with those type of conversations and questions.
I think you're raising some wonderful points, because there are some things that are very visible where I can look at somebody and make assumptions about their lived experiences like you're describing. And there's other things that are not visible. And a lot of the things the disabilities I work with are very stigmatized identities that can be visible or non-visible. So disclosure is a huge aspect of that. But when you're considering race and oftentimes gender, they are visible. And so what I teach a diversity class, and what I encourage people to do is you can be an ally, but you have to allow people with that lived experience or lived expertise, is how people in the disability community prefer to speak for their community. And then you need to work on the people that are stigmatizing that community of your own group. You need to be the one speaking to them, being like controlling that section. But I also think there is a space for people to be a white male and also have lived expertise in something. And so, you know, in what I study, you could have, you know, someone suffering from addiction or had just been released from prison. They would be dealing with some things that they could speak to. So, but I don't know if I fully answered your question.
No, it's not my question. I'm just, you know, just adding to the discussion point. I think there's value in expanding the idea of what it means to be diverse, right? Because when you start bringing in lived expertise into that, then you really are kind of blowing up that narrative. I think it's challenging because it, in some ways, for me, it seems like it has to go hand in hand, but it is challenging for people on the outside, right? To look at a group of people and say, yeah, those people are diverse because they have different lived expertise or experiences, but they all look like they come from the same group. And I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with that in some of the work that you do, particularly as you're working with entrepreneurial, you know, your groups. People are kind of expecting you to report on how diverse and how inclusive you are, and how does that work when you know that you might have a diverse group, but they look to the outside, they look the same.
Yeah, we definitely do. We hear that a lot, and it makes me cringe when people say diversity of thought as a substitute for what we're usually working toward, which is diversity across all groups. And so that's usually how I kind of reframe it, is this, yes, diversity of thought, which comes from diversity of experience, which comes from diverse in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, age, disability, LGBTQ, etc. So kind of just immediately expanding it to, you know, diversity of thought. The most diverse thought comes from the most diverse group of people.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much. That was great.
Is there room for diversity of thought, though? Is there room for that piece of that to be part of the conversation when we talk about inclusiveness? And how do you integrate that into your work? Cecilia is saying that if you don't see the notes, Victor Huang, Christine, Lay, Andy Stowe, and Cecilia are all Asian-ish, but she's the only immigrant. And, you know, in that Asian-ish group of people, they also are from different geographical parts, which also brings some different perspectives there. I'm just reporting on what Cecilia is saying, but my question was to the group is there room for, how do you piece the diversity of thought part into your work?
I ask. I ask questions. What is the foundation? I think there's a great gift in entrepreneurship in terms of inclusiveness and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
What is the first thing you need to learn as an entrepreneur is you need to challenge your assumptions. So when I started diving into this gender conversation, of course, I stepped upon, you know, the whole diversity conversation as such. Whenever someone would state a generalization in terms of way of thinking or based on gender or culture or age or education, or I would ask, if I were not challenging my assumptions, how can I expect others to do it in terms of ways of thinking? So for me, it's the gift of entrepreneurship itself. Challenge your assumptions. In that, I believe we could all work with becoming better at inclusiveness and reach diversity. challenge your assumptions.
So this is Eric, and I'm having some technical challenges, so I may have lost the chat and video side of things. You know, I think in some ways, at least for the work that I do or have been involved with, it makes it so important that the initial conversations around the goals and the structures that are put in place in order to have the conversation that needs to be had, those are so important and so valuable kind of at the very beginning to help, you know, lay some groundwork so that we are able to navigate these things a little bit easier. Because there are times where really we need to dive in and, you know, not use some kind of code word to, you know, so we don't say racism in a room. So I think it's just becomes really important to have those conversations up front about where the folks want to go, so that you can have a real conversation and not be, you know, overly guarded and not really get to the root problems that folks are wanting to address. But that's different in, you know, many, many different communities. So I just trying to bring it back when things have fallen apart or things have gone badly. I always wish that we'd done a little bit better job of being really, really clear on our goals, having the same kind of approach to things, at least among the core team that's putting an event or activity together.
There's a question in the chat for Melinda and Antonia about challenging assumptions in their work. What's the biggest or common pushback?
Antonia, do you want to answer or do you want me to answer?
You know, I'm still digesting that one. If you have something that comes to mind, go right ahead.
Yeah. There are a few things. We get the I don't want to lower the bar pushback a lot. And it comes out in different ways when we're talking with, you know, when we're working on our career fair and we're talking with companies who are thinking about joining us and would be doing it for the first time. They often have an awful lot of questions about the quality of the candidates and where we find these candidates and such, which is tough. And you know, our answer to that is actually, you know, we have the year after year, we have companies that come back and have hired people from our career fair, you know, so they are being hired. So other people are seeing them as qualified candidates, other companies are seeing them as qualified candidates. But the other answer is that, you know, you should be looking at how do underrepresented candidates become a value add to you because of their diverse set of experiences, and really looking at that. The other pushback that we get is, well, we're going too fast and we just don't have time to deal with it. We don't have time to deal with hiring underrepresented people, because it does mean that they have to rethink how they do things and where they look for underrepresented candidates, and the filters that in the tech industry in particular are focused on education, looking at only a couple of schools, really Stanford, Berkeley, a few others, as an indicator of success. But actually the data shows that's absolutely not true. When somebody gets into a company, it has zero correlation with success. So those are the two biggest ones. I guess the third would be kind of tied to the second, which is they don't want to spend the resources to creating the change. Not to be a downer, but you asked. And there are challenges that we have to overcome daily.
Yeah, definitely echo that last one.
for me, that some of the things you said, how do we find them? We don't have time for this. This will be lowering the bar. I've heard all of this also here as in terms, and every time they say we don't have time for this, I say page number 1 of learning to become an entrepreneur, challenge your assumptions. You don't have time to make mistakes because you did not get all the way around the problem. So that is why you need a diverse team, right? To find those but you don't have time. You don't have time to make mistakes, right? Or to lower the bar, you are losing out on talent. You are lowering the bar to just hire 10 of the same. But I can't find them. Well, try Google. And if you're not using the right words, challenge your biases with technology. The technology is there. There's no reason not to do something. Sometimes people are looking for what are the arguments to do something. And we can look for technology, we can look for research, we can look for all this. What are the arguments to do something? The moment I ask people, do you have any arguments for not doing anything? And then they can come up with things like, don't have time, da, 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 da. That's just bad excuses. High performance teams are diverse. End of discussion. Do you have any other arguments for not doing anything? No, then do something.
I love that. Yes. I love that. We call it tambourine. I'm shaking a tambourine over here. So I don't want to keep us too much longer here. I did want to ask if anybody on the call has taken a look at the projects and are participating on any of these. And you might have asked this when I had to step out for a minute, but anybody has taken any interest in doing any of the large scale projects for Inclusive Field. And so those projects, again, are the diverse NRP leadership, so National Resource Providers Leadership, the Ecosystem Builder Speaker Bureau, or the Ecosystem Builder Fellowship. I don't know. I don't know if anybody has raised their hand or is already participating in a team that's doing any of those things. So no, not yet. So there's still opportunity for people to grab a few people on a call to talk about the next steps and maybe pushing one of those things forward. Those are ideas that came out of all the work that has been done around ecosystem building. And I think we're all passionate about it and we're all into our work. And how do we figure out how to move some of those goals forward so that those things can continue to push forward? And no, this is not this is encouragement. Even for myself to think about how to participate in those type of goals and try to get some folks together to move something, one of those forward. So before we close out today, are there any other announcements that should be made?
I'll try and find something to unmute over here. I was looking for the link but couldn't find it right now to throw in the chat, but we'll put it in the follow-up email. But I just saw that I was muted on the other piece, but and it threw me off for a second. But the ESHIP Goals Champions are seeking new folks to help do this, organize calls, help be part of the conversation about the ESHIP goals and how those move forward. And there's an application that is available now online for folks who've been participating in this larger ESHIP effort. So we will share that with you as far as what folks are looking for. But I think it's a really good opportunity to involve new voices who committed to participating in some way. They've been part of some of these events and activities. They show up on things like calls to get those folks more involved and to get their voices kind of at the head of the line for influencing how this all moves forward. So we'll share that in the follow-up notes. Malika, if you might be muted. I think I see you talking.
I had this wonderful story that I was telling you guys. Actually, I was just going to say that I've enjoyed our time today. We will continue to look for people that can be speakers and give some more in-depth insight into the work that they're doing, so that we can leverage those resources, leverage each other's knowledge as we continue to move forward with this. And I'm okay with giving you 3 minutes of your time back if you're okay with taking it. All right, with that, again, thank you guys again. It's nice speaking to you, and we will see you in another month.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.